Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to the meeting of the Skills, Economy and Growth Commission. To all our guests in our virtual meeting room and to everyone watching online as well as here now. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed now. Please note the press may be in attendance. The rights of the press and public to record and film the meeting will apply. Please, can you keep all of your microphones on mute throughout, as this will prevent audio feedback. If you are still getting feedback, please turn off nearby devices. If someone forgets to switch off their microphone, I will mute them. All members and meeting participants should keep their cameras on. Please only unmute your microphones when you're required to make a presentation or to ask or answer a question. If you'd like to speak, you can raise your hand to get my attention. You will note there is a chat function. This should only be used to alert me that you wish to speak, to raise points of order, or to report tech problems you might be having. Officers are able to assist. The chat function must not be used to have conversations with other participants or to enter personal or sensitive information. All chat is recorded, as is a formal meeting. And we haven't got anybody joining by audio, have we?
No.
No. Okay, lovely. Okay, right. So where are we? So, okay. So member apologies. We have Councillors Polly Billington, Councillor Sam Pallis, Councillor Vincent Stotts. Have we had any other apologies?
No, but Councillor Race is running a bit late and he will be here.
Okay, great. And we've also had guest apologies too. So Stephen Hanshaw of the DWP has been called away on urgent business and will no longer be appearing. Okay, so urgent items. Do we have any urgent items tonight at all? Declarations of interest. So the work programme for 21-22. If you could have a look at the work programme, please, for a few minutes. Okay, so you will notice in the November meeting, we were supposed to have a presentation on the energy strategy. Andrew Monk will, of course, refer to this briefly in his report, but it's we will hold that report to a later meeting. Anybody got any other comments on the work report? Can we agree it? Sorry.
Shall I make my comment about next meetings now?
I think that'd be a good time. Yes, Councillor Lufkin.
Okay, thanks. On the December meeting, Councillor Stotts and I think Councillor Smith were wondering if we could include a part of that on how we were going to go about having vehicle electric charging points in the borough, and how they will be located and how they will be managed. If we could we have that as a kind of separate point completely, and perhaps we can write ahead of. I mean, I'm happy to help draft something. Perhaps we can write something ahead of the meeting about the points that we'd like to consider. We've got a real opportunity here to shape how the electric vehicle charging points go into the borough because they're just starting, and our work can, will be effective for a number of years, I would imagine, if we can set some guidelines in now. Thanks.
That's a great suggestion, Councillor Lufkin, because we are looking at the transport strategy. So, so Tim, if you could follow that up with Councillor Stotts and Councillor Lufkin, and then we can agree it with the members. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Thanks. Okay. Apart from that, is that okay for the work programme? Item 4. Yeah. Great. Okay.
Agreed.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Okay. So, item 5, our main substantive item for tonight, which is our skills inquiry. This commission is conducting a skills inquiry to ascertain what the council and its partners know about the need to shift to new skills that are related to net zero, the demand for net zero skills, the creation of net zero jobs, and what the responsibility of the council is on that front. The session will particularly explore the construction, transport and energy sectors when discussing future skills requirements and opportunities for residents as we move forward from the pandemic and aim to build back better and create quality opportunities for residents in the process. I would like to welcome to the meeting for the discussion from the London Borough of Hackney. We're going to have Andrew Monk, who is the Head of Employment Skills and Adult Learning, Simon van Elk, who is the Strategic Delivery Manager, Lucia Polinska, who is the Head of Operations for Hackney Light and Power. We also have as well tonight from New City College. They don't think they're in the meeting just yet, but they will be joining us shortly. Alison Arnaud, the Principal for Hackney and Tower Hamlets, and Jamie Stevenson, the Group Executive Director for Apprenticeships and Business Development. So, if we could make a start to our skills inquiry, I'd like to invite Andrew to unmute his microphone and present, please.
Thanks very much, Councillor Potter. I think Simone or Tim is going to share.
Andrew, if I could I've just omitted to mention that we have our cabinet member responsible for this area also online. So I'd like to welcome Councillor Carol Williams to the meeting, and also Rotimi Atijori from Hackney Light and Power. I know that's not your title, Rotimi, but I haven't got it in front of me. But I know you're here to add anything if you find it helpful to do so. So back to Andrew.
Great, thank you very much, Chair. Yes, Simone or Tim, do you want to? Just while we're doing that, great, fantastic. Just by means of introduction, before we get into the slides, thanks for your introduction, Chair. Revisiting when we met with Scrutiny members over summer to explore what we might do in this session, we very much explored and agreed with following that we would talk about the evidence base, how we might gather an evidence base for this work, and what some of the limitations around that might be, what that London-wide context might be, particularly the GLA London councils, what our emerging approach to a framework for a green economy work will be, which we actually took through cabinet members this morning. Some background around the adult education system and funding models, the council approach to social value, particularly in light of the inclusive economy strategy, and the council's approach for how it supports businesses and area regeneration. And before I go into my bit, I'm also delighted, as you are, Chair, that we've got our partners from New City College, Alison and Jamie here, because one of the positives of the pandemic has been hugely increased levels of partnership working right from the start of the pandemic in the employment skills space, particularly with New City College, Job Centre Plus, Injus, and the green economy is one of a number of areas where we're seeing intense amounts of collaboration on, which will be so important to tackle this very complex issue. So I'll stop there as an introduction and hand over to Simone, who's going to do the first couple of slides about the data and evidence base, and then Simone's, I think, going to hand back to me.
Yes, well, hello. For those who haven't met me, Simone van Elk, glad to join you tonight. I just want to introduce to you kind of a broad outline of what we think we know currently about green economy in London. There's been a lot of discussion about green jobs nationally and internationally, but it's quite an ambiguous term sometimes. And and what's happened in London is that Central London Forward has commissioned specific research to look at green jobs in London. And so I want to present you some of what's come out of that as a kind of starter on this topic. So what you can see here is a mission-based definition for green jobs that has been developed based on this research commissioned by Central London Forward. Sometimes conversations about green jobs can be quite sector specific. So, you know, construction of solar panels, for example. But what this definition does is looks at kind of jobs where the mission is to reduce climate emergency and reduce its impact. So you'll see things here like green finance, you'll see climate change research and development. So kind of areas that contribute to kind of working against the climate emergency more broadly. And this has been made specific to what industries exist in London at the moment. And so what this research has also done is try to identify what green jobs exist in London currently. There's a lot of information in this slide, so just to highlight some things. Currently, estimations about 234,000 green jobs, 4% of total employment. Predominantly professional, high-level, high-skilled jobs, as you might expect given London's labour market with a large portion of graduate employment, and quite male-dominated. In terms of skill supply, there's kind of tendency for green jobs at the moment to recruit from people already in employment rather than directly from people coming out of education. And I think there's then some work been done on projections for the future. So there's kind of a wide range of what green jobs could look like in London, but could be as much as 505,000 by 2030. And that's obviously quite a lot of jobs. There's a projection that the rate of increase could be 8% a year, which is a tremendous amount of growth compared to kind of other industries' growth over recent years. Obviously, there's a wide range of these projections. This is somewhere in the middle. It could be more, it could be less. It's probably useful to note that not all of those will be net new jobs, because obviously some jobs will be lost as well as the economy decarbonizes. And so the conversation about what will actually be additional jobs, there's an estimation that around 140% increase in skilled craft workers and around 120% in managerial and professional employment. Then it's useful to reflect as well on carbon intensive industries in London, which quite a lot of them at the moment. And they will need to scale back if we are to reach net zero across London. And the majority of workers in this industry are, it's quite a white male dominated sector at the moment. Now, obviously, that doesn't tell us what is happening in Hackney specifically. So I have included a slide with some kind of where we know there are gaps in data. So what we don't know at the moment is what this green economy looks like locally. There is further research commission that we're hoping to benefit from, but I think some of the areas we'll want to figure out is what existing green businesses have we got in Hackney? And so what basis is there to build on with businesses that already exist? What would the impact of a transition to net zero be for businesses in Hackney? And that's probably particularly relevant as well for small, medium enterprises. And then I think one thing in terms of our work on labour market employment opportunities is really relevant is which of these opportunities might be local to Hackney compared to ones that could exist across London and might therefore be less accessible. I mean, job opportunities aren't that great if you have to commute for 2 hours, for example. Just to highlight kind of where this research sits and our thinking sits in a wider conversation in London. Now, the GLA has a number of recovery missions, and one of them is around a Green New Deal. The objective here is to double the size of London's green economy by 2030, and trying to address inequality with that. And that obviously feeds into another recovery mission around good quality employment for everyone who wants it in London. London Council specifically has introduced 7 programs to work on climate change, and one of those is around green economy. They have a working group running, which some of us here are members of, so kind of we're feeding into London Council's work on this as well. The definition I've just presented to you is something that is expected to be adopted across London as a working definition for green jobs, which means that hopefully across the GLA, other London boroughs and skills providers, we will all be talking about the same thing when we talk about green jobs. And then what does that mean for the council's approach to green economy? So this is something that Andrew, Monk and I and colleagues have been thinking about for a little bit and trying to develop an approach. For us, it is obviously something we need to develop because of our commitments to net zero, but also something we need to work on in terms of our commitments to inclusive economy. So there are opportunities for residents and businesses here, given the growth projected, given that some of these are likely to be high-skilled, well-paid roles, new opportunities for new businesses to arrive. But there's also, I guess, some responsibility in this work to look at what can be done to help the council's delivery of net zero by looking at skilled labor force and kind of working with supply chains to make sure that net zero could be delivered. I guess in that work, it's really important that we consider just transition. And I think sometimes just transition is described as needing to make sure that those people who might lose their job because they're in a carbon intensive industry, such as, I don't know, oil refinery, need to be provided with opportunities and not lose out because of a transition to net zero. But I think for us as a council, it's probably also quite important that we look at any opportunities in the economy, whether they increase inequalities or just continue inequalities that we know exist. So some of those projections of growth in jobs I just mentioned are in industries that we know currently have ethnicity pay gaps and gender pay gaps, and it's probably important for us in our work that we continue conversations with those industries to try to address those challenges to make sure that any job growth is genuinely accessible. And I'll hand over to Andrew Monk to give you a bit more detail on what our work programme is developing into.
Thank you,
Thanks
Simon.
very much, Simon. If you go to the next slide, thank you. So yes, the emerging approach framework around green economy, which is one of a number of strands of the council's work on climate change, has 5 key strands. Research, so we've done quite a lot of this already, but really digging more into that Hackney specific picture of both sectors which are growing and also from a just transition angle, people who are affected positively, negative. Business engagement, how we support existing businesses transition and support new incoming businesses, including inward investment. Strong focus on green skills, which I'm going to come back to a bit later, how we support people to access those new opportunities as well as changing careers. Career pathways, thinking about people of all ages, how they understand and engage with these new opportunities. And then last but by no means least, for councils, leverage and power in terms of around procurement, social value, and how it can create these opportunities via its supply chains. A key thing cutting across is how the council itself can take a lead and lead by example on this in a way which we've done very successfully with things such as our apprenticeship programs, us taking a lead and showcase this for other businesses to follow. As I said at the bottom here, this is a very complex challenge, and the council is part of a wider system, hence the importance of colleagues from New City College, and I know Steve from JCP can't be here. And a lot of it's going to rely on partner working with public sector partners, third sector partners, but also very much business partners. If you go to the next slide, thank you. Risk and limitations, yes. Skills gaps are a risk, and there are limitations around what all of us are able to fund and how we can support that agenda, because it is a really major transition. And also there's a bit of a chicken and egg thing in terms of there's sometimes a reluctance to invest in green skills when we don't quite know what the economy is going to look like, but I suspect Jamie and Alison are going to speak to this. Just transition is a major challenge, making sure that we do support this growth, but that it doesn't exacerbate existing inequalities, and the importance of aligning it with a wider inclusive economy mission, that we ensure that everyone benefits from this growth, not just certain sectors of society. That we continue to support existing businesses, particularly SMEs and micro businesses, rather than just supporting this economy by inward investment. And also thinking about the reality of the Hackney ecosystem in a very physical sense. We are not like some more outer London boroughs where there's opportunities for green economy, which requires a lot of space. So we have to think quite creatively about this. So you go to the next slide. A couple of slides here on adult education. Now I know, Councillor Potter, this was an area of interest in terms of just how it worked. So I thought it useful to have a couple of slides on adult education. So since September 2020, adult education has been fully integrated with the wider employment and skills service, something which was very much spearheaded as part of a Scrutiny Commission under Councillor Williams' leadership a number of years ago. The council has 3 key areas of strategic focus for adult learning, which are listed here. So training with a direct link to employment, building general and transferable skills, and supporting our residents with wellbeing and positive mental health. Now, this is also an agenda which we're very much talking to partners around for it to be the basis of the borough-wide employment and skills strategy. We're very much aligned with the GLA strategic aims in terms of adult learning as the funders of adult education, but it's also worth saying that in this shift towards an outcome-focused approach, we also value those more social outcomes, particularly increased levels of confidence, improved mental well-being, which adult learning is traditionally delivered. So it's not all about employment outcomes. Is an important thing to mention. If you go to the next slide, again, this point about the system. So we get a significant budget, but it's not huge. And the importance of working with people such as New City College is they have a significant budget in this space, and it's for us to come together and how we can think about areas such as green skills. What we're looking to do as a council is, yes, play a direct delivery role, but also play a leadership role in thinking about what vocational skills looks like, what functional skills look like in East London community learning in the borough. And to do that, we have various networks of providers to have that wider conversation. And work is underway to update our evidence base in light of a new cycle of curriculum planning, which will very much have green economy and green skills at its heart. So if you go to the next slide. Rotimi, as you're here, feel free to chip in on this one. But under the banner of inclusive economy, a huge amount of work has been going on around social value recently, with a focus on where the council has key levers. So planning obligations, so Section 106 obligations, our estate regeneration programs, and also our supply chain and procurement. When we do these, we look to put in place and agree with contractors and developers and construction companies employment skills plans, where we look at social benefit around local labour, apprenticeships, other employment opportunities, but also around green economy and green recovery, which very much forms an increasingly large part of our social value ask. And I'm sure Rotimi will form a very major part of the sustainable procurement strategy, which will be recreated, I think, next year. Rotimi's nodding, good. If you go to the next slide, just a couple of slides on really on my colleague Suzanne's behalf. The council's approach to economic development is a we'd like to think a kind of sophisticated one, but yes, we do support businesses, but it's very much on an area regeneration basis. And we look to work with a range of partners, thinking about different areas of the borough and how they can grow in a sustainable and inclusive way. Good examples of this are the emerging Dawson Plan and its central strategy. And a lot of this is about the area regen team working with a range of partners, including employment skills, but also, for example, parks and property, to make sure that regeneration is indeed inclusive and delivers social value. If you go to the next slide. Oh, one back, I think. Thank you. Yeah, there's a major focus on working with housing regeneration to unlock sites for redevelopment, and obviously there is a major opportunity around green, I guess, greener development, but also green skills and green jobs as part of that. There's also significant focus on communicating and engaging with businesses, which obviously forms a very important part of how we support existing businesses to transition. And the council has a new economic development function coming on board, a part of which will be around beefing up our inward investment offer. Yes, we go to the next slide. I think I'm handing over to Lucia. Councillor Potter, do you want to, there's a couple of slides on energy now. does it make sense for Lucia to talk about that and then to take any questions?
Yeah, sure. If Lucia's willing to do that. Oh,
Oh.
Councillor Williams has got a comment first.
Yeah, I thought it might be helpful. We didn't hear from the cabinet lead members at the start, so before they go on to energy, or you go on to energy, I thought this might be a good juncture to hear from the 2 cabinet lead members on the call this evening.
Yep, and I'd like to welcome Councillor Mette Coburn. So can I hear from Councillor Williams, then Councillor Mette Coburn, and then we'll go to Lucia, the remaining for the slides.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for inviting us to Scrutiny this evening. This is an incredibly important piece of work, and I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things to stress an emphasis around just transition and that piece around how we can help residents who are at the greatest risk of where their jobs might become obsolete, to help them develop an opportunity or take the opportunity that arises from the changes in the green economy and green jobs. I think it's really imperative that we do that, and we use our leverage as a council so that they can make the most or find work elsewhere. Simone gave an example of possibly where jobs can become obsolete there. What we will have to do as a council as well, of course, is lead by example and look at our own staff across the council to see what the risks are to them, where they will need upskilling and what the gaps are, so we can develop our own workforce and lead by example for employers across the borough. I think we also need to build on the progress that we have made already on the work that we do on diversity and inclusion, and I think that we have to leverage that support from employers as well. We want them to be equally committed to developing a diverse workforce. We don't want them to just talk about diversity and inclusion. We want them to actually deliver that, particularly in those sectors where we know that there are gender and ethnicity pay gaps and disability pay gaps as well. We need to work to ensure that there are opportunities for those from protected characteristics. And I think that's really quite key. We are not starting from ground zero, of course. We have lessons learned from the work that we've been doing in the apprenticeship network, as well as our Kickstart programme, and the work that we've been doing with London Living Wage and signing up Hackney businesses to the London Living Wage. All of this work, of course, helps to set an ambitious target for our residents and to adopt an approach that is inclusive and that falls in line with the anti-poverty work that we are doing as a borough. We do need to continue this. We do need to continue to use our influence and make those changes in a borough that has experienced widening inequalities and may continue to do so following the pandemic, the end of furlough and the loss of £20 uplift in the universal credit as well. And we have a lot to do ourselves as well as the council. As Andrew was talking about the Employment Skills and Adult Learning Service, we know that there's a huge amount that we can do to prepare within the council our employment support pathways to help residents to make their first step into the labour market. But we also have an ageing well strategy, so we do have to look at both ends of the age spectrum as well to ensure that those entering the labour market and those at the other end of their working lives who need to reskill have the opportunity to do so. I just think those were the 2 points that I really wanted to emphasise and underscore, and I'll just hand over to Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Coburn, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, is it okay if I can go, Chair, is it okay if I can let Lucia go first because it relates to my portfolio, and then maybe I could summarise just after that?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you, Councillor Coburn, but you're saying you want to come in a bit later after the presentation, yeah?
yeah, can I just let Lucia go because obviously it relates to my portfolio,
Great.
and then I can come in straight after that.
Okay, so before we go back to Lucy, I'd just very quickly like to welcome Jamie Stevenson and also Alison Arno from the new City College, who will also be presenting shortly. You're very welcome. Okay, Lucia, would you like to comment on the net zero energy strategy?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Chair. Lucia Polinska, Head of Operation Hackney Light and Power. So obviously Council approved the energy strategy in summer this year, and as part of this work, the emerging initiative came out in form of the Energy Action Plan, which we pulled together, which summarized the steps we need to take as organization to achieve a net zero target by 2040. And those are summarized here. Emerging decarbonization through energy efficiency and retrofit works and replacing of fossil fuel technologies. And that takes within the same work stream and deployment of the low carbon technologies and infrastructure within our existing buildings and also new builds and fleet replacement. Within the fleet works, we not just have to replace the vehicles, but also invest in electric vehicle charging infrastructure for the organization, reducing embodied carbon for our developments as part of the regeneration programs, and also as the wider engagements within the borough and borough-wide strategy of net zero to support and engage and promote the benefits of engaging and investing in energy efficiency and low carbon transition within our production and utilization sectors. Next slide. So the next, how the green jobs linked with the energy strategy is through opportunities which the energy strategy provides for the growth and skills sector. Mainly in terms of the jobs which will be created and skills required really within the green economy to achieve our net zero carbon target, and also in development of the courses which are needed within the value and the supply chain to respond in emerging technologies and changes within the market.
Thank you.
As part of this work, we joined together as a work program between the green economy and skills team and the energy team to collaborate on supporting the green jobs. So basically, we look at planning now for the skills demand which will be needed within the young people who just enter the energy market, and also supporting the existing workers which might be outside, which might lost the jobs and being unemployed for a while, to move into the sector and in the employment within the net zero carbon economy in the future, and also supporting workers which are already in the market but needs upskilling for the emerging technologies. For example, the gas boiler engineers which will need to be reskilled to deliver the air source heat pumps. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I think rather than do questions separately, I think if we could go straight to Alison and
I think we're going to hear from Councillor Coburn.
oh, Councillor Coburn's coming to this point. Apologies. It's quite hard for us to hear you clearly in this chamber, so just so you're aware of that. That's clearer, Councillor Coburn.
Okay, cool. Well,
Very clear, in fact.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Chair, for having us at the meeting today. And obviously, I won't take up too much time. And obviously, thank you to the officers and everyone who's obviously provided their presentation today. I think firstly, just a massive thank you to Councillor Williams on her leadership on this, particularly trying to sort of convene and work across Cabinet to, work closer to reach our net zero ambitions and obviously bring this piece of work to sort of scrutiny. I think it's incredibly important, and without sort of wanting to repeat a lot of what's been said, I think we all know that we, of course, live in a climate emergency, and I think we often talk about, and this comes back to the reframing work about how we sort of bring together, when we talk about climate justice being a social justice issue. And one of the things that I've been quite clear about, Chair, is about how we can make sure that there's a green dividend for people, and how we make sure that when we're talking about a green dividend, that we're able to excite people about the job opportunities that may be sort of available to them. And of course, the green jobs that we talk about is incredibly important part of that. And of course, I think the big challenge that we have as a borough is about how we can help to define that. You know, you've heard about the definitions that we spoke about London-wide or UK-wide. And I think the big challenge we have is about how we can make sure it's Hackney specific, recognizing sort of the diverse demographics that we have in Hackney. And of course, you know, Hackney is unique in its own right. So we need to make sure that transition works for people in our neighborhoods and of course our borough. So I think a lot of this work that we're doing now is really both within the corporate body, just trying to understand what those green jobs look like within our organization and how we can obviously lead by example. But then also, it's also about how we can sort of one around making sure that we can shape our economy in Hackney, because we know that things are going to change. You know, Lucia spoke about our net zero energy strategy, and obviously that's a key part of, you know, that's going to drive thousands of jobs, sort of not just in Hackney, but we're going to see that especially as we come out of COP as well. And I think what we need to do is make sure that, you know, we really try to understand how we can make sure that our communities benefit from that. So I think that's a key part of it. And I think one of the things that we want to continue to do is to speak to our, you know, our communities and residents about what they see as the future of jobs in Hackney. And, you know, that's part of the reason why the Citizens Assembly is going to be a key part of that too. So without wanting to take up too much more time, sorry, I've been around from meeting to meeting, hence why I'm out of breath. And I wanted to get onto the camera. I just wanted to just sort of emphasize the importance of this in terms of our wider net zero energy strategy. And I think, you know, this conversation has to start. We hear a lot about green jobs, but, you know, there's no real, we hear a lot about at a national level, but we need to really start defining it for our community, because ultimately, if we don't move fast enough, what will happen is that this shift will happen without none of us being able to influence it. And obviously, ultimately, it's not going to benefit our communities the way that we want it to benefit them. So I think this is an incredible piece of work. And again, once again, massive thank you to the officers for the incredibly hard work. And then, of course, to Councillor Williams for her leadership on the inclusive economy strategy, and of course, now within the green economy context as well.
Thank you, Councillor Coburn. And I think the committee echoes your words. We'd like to very much thank both yourself and Councillor Williams for the leadership she has shown for many years in terms of driving, you know, the employment skills agenda, but, you know, particularly in the direction of, you know, the green economy and the just transition, which you both very much believe in. So without further ado, if we could go over to Alison and your colleague. Sorry, I'm just looking for him on the screen.
Jamie.
Oh, there you are, Jamie. Sorry. If I could go over to both of you, and then if you could decide how you want to present your item between you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm hoping that Tim or someone else, one of the other officers, is going to share it for us. We were concerned about our own internet link. Now, if that's the case, I'm going to start, and Jamie's going to tell me when I go off-piste, I think is our approach, if possible. So thank you very much, and we'd like to start by echoing the praise that's already gone to Councillor Williams. It's really refreshing to be asked to be part of this, and really exciting for the borough. So I'll go through bits that have already been covered and skip over them, and then please come back if you think I've missed anything important. So if I can move on to the next slide, please, that would be helpful. So I'm going to start first of all with the way that we are looking at this for our students. And we started the process by asking the question, why should the college care? And the three things that we've come up with are that if you look at any of the surveys that have been done on the green agenda, this is 16 to 34-year-old demographic that are the most worried about climate change. And that feels an awful lot of our students would be at the centre of that. That 28 out of 32 London boroughs have declared a climate emergency. And in fact, of the 9 million people in London, 1.3 live at risk of flooding. Now, that may not be our students per se, but it will be their families and their friends and the others around them. And so they have a vested interest, we believe, in the climate agenda. and that for a majority of our young people, that move to future net zero is going to affect everything about their lives, where they work, where they live, how they spend their disposable income. And for that reason, it's absolutely vital that we play a role in supporting them to look at this as a viable part of their future, an essential part of their employment. Next slide, please. So we talk about passion, not postcode. I'm obviously here talking to Hackney Council this evening, and we will be looking very much at the work that we do on the Hackney campus. But we actually work with 12 London boroughs, and it's really important that wherever our learners are, they are as invested in the Hackney agenda as anyone who lives in a postcode that's covered by you. They're already really passionate about the green agenda. We didn't have to go and invigorate them. They're already involved. We have student environmental officers. We've been members of Friends of the Earth for about the last 11 years, and we do a lot of client campaigning on climate change. You may or may not be aware that colleagues within the borough were approached by our students a couple of years ago around car pollution on the Kingsland Road, and they've been very active, and we need to channel that. We want to make that something around healthy, productive and legal action, and not see them feel disenfranchised and seeking perhaps the more destructive forms of protest and action going forward. We generally believe that their passion is actually our power, and that we need to harness that and make it part of what we take forward. Next slide, please. So we are part of the Climate Change Action Roadmap for FE. It always makes me laugh that we're talking about climate change and we call it a roadmap, but the idea of a route, a way forward, something that we're going to do together. We have signed up to this, as have all of the colleges that belong to the AOC, and we have been part of, therefore, reducing our carbon footprint, talking to students about measuring theirs and looking at how the college can take this forward since January 2021. This was only, the inception of this was only December of 2020, so we've been involved from the very beginning. Again, next slide, please. And we're obviously doing some of the work around teaching it. You wouldn't expect that we are not. And I think it was Lucia who mentioned earlier around things like electric charging points. All of our students doing electrical or motor vehicle have been trained in additional units to look at things like electric charging points. We are offering that to local people who run their own garages at the moment, being able to branch out into these areas. Interestingly, just on that, for the sake of this particular group, there was an organisation a couple of days ago on Radio 4 talking about why it was that our local garages are not getting involved in hybrid and electric car maintenance. That at the moment is an issue because those making those cars are signing up to 3 or 4 year warranties, if not longer, and have a monopoly on how those cars are being maintained and looked after. And I think one of the things we need to look at is how the council speaks out about getting rid of that monopoly. It's inappropriate that people can only get their car fixed in one place, or that if you want one of these cars, you can only buy it from certain places. And I think this goes beyond just the employment. We already do things around measuring our carbon footprint. The students have a measure they can look at, and they can track it a little bit like a Fitbit and see that in doing certain things like walking to college, turning off their heating, wearing another jumper, meat-free Mondays, they're able to alter that carbon footprint and see immediately their impact on the environment. Next slide, please. And we also, for example, in subjects, we're teaching about donut economics, which Councillor Coburn mentioned before, this idea about there being an ethos and ethics behind what we teach and our economy going forward, and that there needs to be a balance between how we financially gain within the borough, but also how we gain as a group of humans. And so you'll see on there the safe and just space for humanity and the regenerative and distributive economy against those things that are on the outside that perhaps are our challenges at the moment around chemical pollution, freshwater withdrawals, land conversion, etc. So these are things that we're already teaching and we're already doing. Next slide, please. And just to give you an idea in terms of our estates as an employer in your borough, you'll see that we are across our 10 campuses and our 10 buildings. We are looking at different ways that we can bring that climate into something that we do every day. So we have a planning application for a building in Poplar that is carbon neutral. We're building a wellness centre at Epping that is entirely, all the resources used within it are entirely reusable. It is a building that will again give us carbon neutral footprint. We're designed a centre for sustainable industries at our centre in Rainham. We're looking at an alternative energies plant, possibly on the Hackney campus. We're looking at travel incentives. We're delivering on retrofitting, not only in terms of our learners and their employment, but also in terms of the syllabus that we teach. And we are looking at heat pumps. And in fact, we're in discussions with the London Borough of Tower Hamlets at the moment to support us in replacing all of our old boilers across the London Borough of Tower Hamlets with heat pumps. And we'll be looking to do that across the rest of our estates as and when we make the partnerships to do so. The picture there is a wind-powered mobile phone charger that our students designed and is used across the Hackney campus by both staff and students. Obviously a bit cumbersome to put in your pocket, but just a really nice idea. They are beginning to think about how we might take those problems forward. Unfortunately, since we built that, we've had very little wind, but I think today was a good day to charge your phone, and we've seen more people utilising it. Next slide, please. So we're very interested in careers, not jobs. It's fine. The next one's fine as well. So we're looking now at the skills supply consideration for our students. And apologies if you've seen this data before, if it's a little small, but you have the slides to go back to. At the moment, only about 1% of the green workforce enters straight from full-time education. It's about 3% from, this is in terms of FE, I should say. It's about 3% from across all sectors, but only 1% from green. So that's clearly something we've got to improve. Very few people at the moment leave FE and go straight into jobs that are defined as green. There are entrants from other sectors to the green sector, which makes up about 6% of the workforce, and the labour and skills that are going into green, a lot of them are coming from the manufacturing sectors as those areas sort of decarbonise. That said, we don't have a huge pool of those within Hackney, so that's not going to help us. If you look at the FE sector, I won't go through all of these, but if you look at the FE sector, just over 20,000 learners in relevant courses in FE currently. This has been relatively stable over about the last 3 years, but there has been a large increase in numbers in building construction courses. And I can tell you that across New City College this year, we have exceeded our target numbers for building and construction by somewhere between 20 and 30%, depending on the campus. It's a real growth industry, and there's a lot of passion for it, particularly the technical skills element. So that's electrical and plumbing, not so much around the other areas that require decarbonisation. So retrofitting, industrial, insulation, the alternatives to carpentry and things like dry lining, mastic asphalt. We need to do more work to get those out there and in the public domain. Similarly, about 20,000 apprenticeships start in relevant sector subjects, so subjects that could lean into the green economy, mostly in business apprenticeships rather than the crafts, however. Really what I'm trying to show you is there is already a field of learners there, but as a proportion of those students who might go on to make these their careers, there is a really long way to go. I won't go through the whole slide, or I'll take more than my allocated time, but if we move on to the next one, I'm happy to take questions on any of this. So this is just the estimated green jobs currently in London by sub-region. You'll see the source at the bottom there, and I'm sure this is data that you have looked at before. But really interesting for us where the big money are, the big bucks. And we're obviously, as an organisation, we're looking at homes and buildings. We're looking at the construction and building enterprise. We're also, to a certain extent, looking at power, but that is quite a closed book, in as much as the major power and energy partnerships tend to do most of that training internally. But around green finance, that's quite interesting. It's quite poorly defined in some ways, but is another sector that the borough might look to get into. And you can see there the numbers of people currently in those jobs across London is really quite a substantial volume. If we move on and look at the next slide, please. So this is the green workers by their highest qualification. So what we need to look at is, are the levels of the qualifications that New City College and other providers are using going to fill those gaps? And I think it's really important that we look and see that there is a very small number of jobs available to those with no qualifications or low qualifications. And that in fact, the current green landscape requires people who are really very highly qualified, degree or equivalent. So we are focusing on that dark blue area across these, which is about A-level GCSE, so level 2 and level 3, because there will be movement in that section going forward. We do have higher education, we do higher apprenticeships, but I think what this is showing us is the extent to which we need to adjust where we put the training. It's not just a case of someone's done a level 3 qualification in something technically green, and as a result, they're going to go out and get a job. The job market at the moment is looking for highly skilled workers, and we need to reflect that in our training. Next slide, please. So just to have a quick look at this and where they are, building and civil engineering is about 22% of the vocational qualifications that are being looked for in the green sector, and it's only about 5% of all other areas. So there's clearly a push that way. Electricity and energy is about 14%, finance, banking and insurance about another 7%. Picking up on the comments that were being made just as I arrived this evening, the green workforce is currently very male dominated and far less ethnically diverse than the workforce overall. And I've just put some, I think, fairly sad statistics there, that 2/3 of green workers are male, compared with 54% of all workers in London, and 70% of green workers are white, compared with 64% over London. And I think that speaks to the opportunities and the aspirations that we have for our borough and our residents, and the changes that will need to be made to reflect that. Next slide, please. So one of the things we talk to our employers about is why they should get involved in this, why they should be working with us. And you will have seen this before, but I thought it was useful just to share it. I think there is a move towards, just as in terms of investments, there's a move towards ethical investment. There is a move towards ethical partnerships. And I think you're not going to be a company that is aspiring for future net zero and working with companies who are coal burning, etc. It's exactly the reason that a lot of large companies no longer invest in China, for example. Not showing commitment can affect their ability to borrow from the banks. If you're not able to commit to this, it's one of the questions now for large commercial borrowing, and it's not something that is necessarily well known. So we share that with our employers. Staff and clients want to work with responsible companies. It's one of the things when you do surveys of people and where they want to work. A lot of people want to work for a company they feel happy and proud of, and that now involves net zero. Reducing carbon emission can be part of your corporate social responsibility. And I think, again, it's about just saying to somebody, you can discharge it this way. And these are the things we're trying to persuade our partners to do. European competitors are in all likelihood already on the future net zero path. So in terms of competition, we don't want to be lagging behind. We don't want to be the coal smoking country. And you can no longer bid for government contracts over 5 million without a demonstrable carbon reduction roadmap. And I think sometimes you just have to remind people that it affects their pocket as well as their souls. Next slide, please. So in ambition, we talk about from here and now to next and how. So what are we going to do from where we are to where we want to be? If I can move on to the next slide, please. These are those occupational changes. So I showed you 2020, this is 2030, and a central forecast of what that might look like. And again, you can see that the enormous increase in opportunities, far less at the semi-skilled element, but certainly skilled craft on there is your construction areas. That is your electrical, your plumbing, and your construction. I think the associate area and professions and technical tends to be more the scientific and the developmental. It also involves hospital workers. Professionals, it tends to be within blue-collar working positions, and managers is self-explanatory. But just to give an idea of where these jobs are, we use this data with parents to suggest that this is a growth area that they need to be getting into, and the opportunities that are coming around green. It's a forecast, it's not a prediction, but it is based on far better data than I am able to provide, and therefore quite a good place for us to start. Next slide, please. So just some detailed occupational changes, and again, apologies for the denseness of the slide, but obviously you have time to read this in your leisure. But we are looking by 2030 across London for about 17,500 more electricians as we move towards electric rather than gas-fired heating. I mean, electric radiators, electric cars, all of these things will require more electricians. We don't do the subject sector area for gardening, but I sort of wish we did, bearing in mind the vastness of that. But that might be something that another provider in the borough wants to consider. But nearly 10,000 more plumbers, heating, ventilation engineers, 161% increase. These are areas of growth that are opportunities for local people, as well as having a socially responsible element to them. There are national shortages of electricians, plumbers, and production managers in construction. These are areas that people can get jobs in now, but they can build a sustainable future that is a career and not a job. And that's what we want for our young people, something they can develop and grow and progress in. Really happy to go over the rest of the data that is on here, but mindful I must be getting quite close to my time now. So I'm just going to move on to the last couple of slides. These are our aims and actions. So these are the things that we as a college are doing going forward. So we need to professionalise the perception of some SSAs as subject sector areas. That's how our curriculum is broken down. I'm particularly concerned with the perception amongst parents of some of these areas and professions, and how we encourage people who perhaps were aspiring for their children to be lawyers, pharmacists, accountants, and actually tell them there is a true and real prospect for them in something like plumbing. If parents who are highly influential around sort of 14 to 16, when careers and options are being done, if they don't see these careers as viable, aspirational, then no matter what we do, we will not have young people going into them. And we need to be mindful of that, given the borough's highly successful A-level record, for example. People don't necessarily go to university to become plumbers. We need people to rethink their aspirations. We need to have an honest conversation around gender and racial disparity, and certainly in terms of applications, opportunities and ambition. And by that, I mean, if you look at the demographics across the FE sector nationally, you will see that in certain subjects, construction and sport, at low levels, there is a high volume of black males. For example, we have more females doing science than we do males. That is unusual. We have very few female students coming through construction, and a lot of the students who come to construction come to do it at a kinesthetic level, at a practical hands-on level. We need them to aspire to the professional jobs at the top end, to be the project managers, to be the designers of the future, be taking the green agenda first. That takes some honesty on our part and on the parts of all those who educate in the borough. We need to engender some ownership and some consequences within our own organisation, so we're living and breathing this. So just stupid things like the reduced access to photocopying. You know, we all go, yes, that's a really good idea, and then it doesn't apply to us, it applies to other people, and we need to think about that. Clear budget choices for students and staff. We need to explore opportunities into AG progression, bearing in mind that disparity between the opportunities at level 2 and level 3 and then further up. And we're working in partnership with the Careers College and with Bath Spa to put some of that in place on the Hackney campus, so that learners can progress all the way through to level 4, level 5, level 6, even level 7. We need to hold our partners and employers to account around future net zero in exactly the same way we do about London Living Wage or the Disabilities Act. And we need to work in collaboration with our councils and our learned colleagues this evening to make sure this happens and it's a cohesive approach. And I'm going to stop there. I apologise. I think I've gone far longer than I was given. Thank you for your time.
Alison, your comments were your presentation, sorry, should I say, was very, very welcome. And it's really encouraged to hear the work that, you know, the college is doing and the approach you're taking. Before I go out to members, could I just very briefly whether our cabinet members would like to make any comments, or you'd like to come in perhaps during the conversation on what you've just heard from New City College. Okay.
No, I don't have anything to say, but I did want to emphasise what Dr. Arnaud said. This is really important that we do work together. We can't deliver this alone as either a council or New City College. It has to be a partnership work right across the piece, including business, including civil society, the public sector as well. It's got to be a partnership approach to have any real success at delivering the opportunities that we want for our residents and green jobs.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Okay, I've noticed Councillor Sharman would like to speak, ask a question or make a comment.
I guess, I mean, first of all, to thank everyone for the range that we've heard. And I think what Councillor Williams has just said about the need for a broad-based approach that builds partnerships is absolutely crucial. I guess what the frustration I have is that 2.5 years ago, we declared the climate emergency. And I think what we've got and heard today is a very good list of things that need to be done and aspirations. I think, though, that there's a lack, and maybe it's a lack of leadership on the executive. Our job as the commission here is to tax the executive and say, are your ambitions going to be realized by this program? And I guess my concern is twofold. Is there really adequate leadership in the executive as a whole to bring the very complex range of inputs together? We've heard about skills, we've heard about some of the, particularly around the skills, but a whole range of other things that need to be done. Very helpful contribution just now from the NCC, just adding to that range. My worry is that there isn't enough leadership that coordinates all that together. So it's a question, I think, back to the executive as much as to the individual cabinet members. Do we have a powerful enough commitment from the centre that gives it the same sort of urgency that we had for the pandemic? We were not mucking around 2.5 years later making a list of aspirations. On the pandemic, we went in there with a real program of action. And it was an action that we didn't know where we were going, so we had to build by experience. And I guess I would like to see the other part of my worry is that there's nothing in here about resources. There's nothing here about the priorities between these various things. And most of all, even on the information, I'm frustrated that we cannot translate the list of jobs that are affected, even as a preliminary estimate. 2.5 years later, we're still not clear how many jobs in Hackney are related to climate change activities, or the ones that will be threatened. And yet those are the basic numbers that we will need to form a program. Now, you won't get perfect numbers, and there'll always be a reason to deepen the knowledge. I'm not saying that, but you've got to start somewhere. And just going to social economic groups, just doing the basic SEG, the thing that the NCC has just presented to us, I thought very helpfully. Why have we not got those first numbers for Hackney? And then we can begin to say, right, we need some more information on that. There's a fuzzy area in the definitions here. We need to go. We're not, we're just told further information. So I'm really frustrated by that we haven't even got a sort of starting point yet. And then what are out of the many very good actions that Andrew took us through, and none of which I could quarrel with, I thought they were excellent, but how much money are we thinking? What are the priorities between that? What resources are we going to commit to this activity as compared to that, and why? We don't have a theory, what's called rather grandly, a theory of service. The sense that if you do this, pull this lever, then you'll have this effect. And you'll need to do a number of these things together to make them all add up to it. So I guess my real worry is a sense of urgency, action, and priorities in this. And that comes back to my basic point about, is the executive really matching what it said 2.5 odd years ago, that this is a climate emergency, something we've just heard last week at COP? And are we still taking this step by step as though we have a lot of time? We do not have a lot of time. I really am convinced about that. And I don't think we're yet seeing it in this council in terms of its strategy, even in the skill set, where there is a lot good going on. I'm not absolutely criticising that, but I guess I want to come back to leadership in this area.
Thank you, Councillor Sharman, for your points. I'm going to come to Councillor Coburn to talk about the urgency situation and the work that the executive is undertaking. Then perhaps, Andrew, I don't know if you could, I know you talked about looking at what is the situation in Hackney in terms of data. I know Simon mentioned this is work that you're doing currently. It'd be just good to know what work you have done, how you're planning to reach out to different businesses, how you're identifying them. So a bit more concrete comments about that would be useful. So I'll go to Councillor Coburn first.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And sorry for the change of outfit. I was just a bit hot in my seat, so I wanted to just change my top in that regard. But let me assure Councillor Sharman that, you know, this council is doing everything it can to tackle the climate emergency. And actually, you know, I take quite a lot of pride in the fact that we are, I think, in my eyes and in many eyes, actually, we're leading the agenda on climate change and tackling the climate crisis. You know, you would have heard about some of, I know you're specifically referring to obviously skills, but, you know, when you think about the action that the council has taken since declaring the climate emergency, whether it's, you know, announcing the biggest area-based back electric vehicle charging points with 3,000 by 2030, whether it's committing to the World Health Organization's air quality targets on air particulate matter by 2030. We've obviously set out an air quality action plan, setting out 47 ways in which we plan to tackle toxic air pollution, 2,500 street trees, with 11,000 more in our parks and green spaces. We've obviously installed 15 low traffic neighbourhood schemes recently with the Stoke-Newington scheme, 48 school streets covering over 51 schools across the borough. You know, I can go on and on. We've obviously switched our council's energy supply to 100% renewable energy. We've just recently actually got voted as the 3rd greenest borough in the UK. And actually, when you look at the metrics within that, compared to other councils, whereas they spend 92p per person in relation to environmental policies, Hackney Council ranks highest with £3.72 in terms of our per spend. So I think I take quite a lot of pride in what the council is doing to respond to the climate crisis. And actually, when I was at COP together with the mayor of Hackney, you know, we had mayors of Athens, you know, mayors from all around the US and other parts of the continent coming up to us and asking us for advice on how we can do more and obviously support them in terms of sharing expertise around tackling the climate crisis. So I think it should be in no doubt that Hackney is leading the way in tackling the climate crisis. And I think that's incredibly important to note. Now, I think coming more specifically in relation to your points about the work that we're doing around the skills agenda specifically, I think firstly, we hear a lot about green jobs, and obviously we've spoken a lot about that. And the work that the team is doing, Andrew, I'm sure will come in and to talk more about, it's more about scoping and understanding that. So even when we set out the net zero energy strategy, we were very clear that within the first 5 to 10 years, there's going to be a whole process of exploring and understanding what are the projects and actions that need to be taken to help us reach our ambitions of net zero by 2040. I think, you know, we alongside other local authorities and of course the government have committed to net zero, and all with different dates. But I think, you know, what we're looking for is for direction in terms of, you know, the resources that need to come from government for us to do. And we're exploring lots of different financial options. But I think it's, you know, as I said right at the start as well, I think the council has, you know, within its own means, it's leading the way. And obviously that's still confined within in the budget cuts that we've obviously faced from central government since 2010. And I think even then, you know, we're still doing a lot around that. And I think the paper specifically now that obviously we're discussing is looking at really defining that for Hackney. And I'm not aware of actually other local authorities who has more specifically defined and actually able to sort of quantify what those jobs look like locally. I think we need to really excite our communities. Look, where I'm sitting right now in Plexel in Here East, I remember when I was growing up, you know, this used to be an old abandoned dog racetrack. And on Sundays, I used to come here for Sunday market. And, you know, when I was growing up, obviously it was a lovely place to come to. And of course, after the Olympics, where, you know, Councillor Sharman will be very much aware of this, of course, after the Olympics were announced, you know, this whole area went through a massive regeneration. And when the whole tech and creative industries were coming through to Hackney, both in Shoreditch and of course through to Hackney Wick, it excited communities about the types of jobs that they can sort of seek from those new job opportunities that we created. So I think what I want to do in Hackney, and that's why this work collaboration that we're doing with both Councillor Williams and of course Councillor Nicholson is really important, is really thinking about, when we're thinking about tackling the climate crisis, it's not just about, yes, of course it's about saving our planet and about reducing our carbon emissions. That's of course the most important thing. But it's about how do we create a green dividend that excites our communities, one that has better jobs, one that has cleaner air, and one that is all about really trying to, really reimagine the way that we live ultimately. So I think what this work will specifically do is hopefully define that for Hackney. Otherwise, the easy thing for us to do is sort of take the more national, London-wide regional work and try to sort of to think of that in the context of Hackney. But what we want to do is really translate what that means for our community. So hopefully, I think that, give us a bit of time. There is urgency, and I think on a corporate level, what I would say is a final point. Sorry, Chair, I know I've been talking quite a lot, taking over from my predecessor, who I'm not disappointed in that regard. But what I would say as a final point is, on a leadership level, is I don't want tackling the climate crisis to be only the urgency of mine or, the officers who are responsible within the service areas. I want it to be a priority for every single member of this council, every single employee of this council. And that's some of the work that we're doing around, really about trying to make sure that the environmental sustainability work that we're doing, it's not just a nice thing to be involved in for different service areas. It's a core part of everything that we're trying to be delivering. Obviously, that's what we talked to the Scrutiny panel some time ago, where, we heard from the new chief executive about his priorities for that. Of course, you're very well acute and aware about my priorities, and of course, the mayor's priorities too. So I think there's going to be a lot more work around trying to make sure that we improve the climate literacy within the corporate organisation, so that everyone within the organisation not just thinks about it in their individual carbon footprint, but of course also thinks about it in terms of the service area and the delivery. So I'll let Andrew come in more specifically in relation to sort of the definition and have whatever more he wants to add in. Thank you so much.
And if after Andrew, when Andrew comes in, I know that New City College are having to leave at 8:30. So after you've made your contribution, and Andrew, if I could ask members to think about questions specifically for New City College, so we can make the most of our time with them, and then we can revert to questions of the council. Okay, so Andrew, do you want to comment on any work you've done so far to identify skills and businesses in Hackney?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks for your comments and questions, Councillor Sharman. So just a segue from Councillor Coburn's comments, for those of you from Hackney, obviously aware of this, we have a new chief exec, about 4 to 6 weeks ago started. He's been very clear that climate change, climate emergency and inequalities are at the very top of his in tray. This is obviously an area which cuts across both of those. Just in terms of pace with research, this isn't meant to be a bureaucratic answer, but it was incredibly important that we got that WPI economics commissioned by CLF on a sub-regional and regional basis done first. I won't, I'm sure Alison won't mind me saying a huge part of her slide deck came from that evidence base. That was why it was a really good set of slides. Same with Simone also referenced that. Not only is it really good data, but it's also really important that stakeholders across London, GLA, colleges, businesses are all singing from the same hymn sheet, using the same definition. That is then the platform for us to do the research in Hackney to understand what the local picture looks like, which kind of takes me onto resources. I am under no illusions that we are going to need to resource this in terms of people within the council and also looking at extra resources. This is why Scrutiny, having this discussion, is so important. And we were always very clear, certainly conversations with Councillor Potter, Councillor Billington over the summer, around sort of co-designing this effort, early doors around what this looked like. So for me, Scrutiny have a really, really valuable role to play, including kind of how the council might lead by example. And just a final point about skills, and Councillor Williams may want to come up on this afterwards. We've been on a real journey over the last 18 months, and I feel we've really moved at pace here during the pandemic, where we have aligned what adult education in the council and borough is doing with corporate priorities. That wasn't the case 18 months ago. That was so important, and Councillor Williams reported on that over the summer at Cabinet, so that when we do have a situation of great complexity like the climate emergency, we've got the ducks in a row to say, actually, we are going to focus and corral council priorities and council resources on tackling this corporate priority. We wouldn't have been able to do that if we hadn't done this foundational groundwork around skills and adult education. So look, I'd certainly, and if you ask my team, we can certainly always go faster and more. So I completely agree with Councillor Sharman, but we are going as fast as we can on this.
Thank you. Andrew, Councillor Williams, do you want to come in very quickly before I go to members for questions for Alison and Jamie.
Was that me, Chair? Sorry.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, I just wanted to, I guess, make a couple of points. One around political leadership, and as Councillor Coburn was saying, this, and as I was saying earlier as well, we really can't do. There is strong political leadership here, but we can't do this alone. Not only do we have to work across a partnership, it takes a partnership to deliver green jobs, a green economy, and our commitment on reaching net zero by 2040. It takes personal commitment from every single one of us, but it also needs to be done across multiple portfolios as well. Councillor Coburn and I are here today, but there are other cabinet lead members who will be required in their portfolio areas to take a strong leadership in order for us to deliver on this piece of work. Just in terms of resources, I mean, Councillor Sharman's absolutely right. We do need more resources. We are all aware of what happened in the recent budget announcement. There have been massive cuts. We have in Hackney experienced a decade of cuts with 140 million taken out of our budget. And rather than levelling up, what has happened in Hackney is the government has levelled down. We need investment not only in local government, but in higher education as well as adult learning in order for us to do the work that we need or required to do to deliver a green economy and green jobs. We don't have that investment, but we're still committed to doing that. And the only way that we are going to do it without the investment from central government is through that partnership that we've discussed here this evening.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Williams. Okay, so members, so just questions specifically now for New City College, and apologies, I should have started off with the questions with that, Alison and Jamie. So, Councillor Race.
Thank you. Thanks very much for the presentation. There we go. Start again. Thank you very much for the presentation. I thought it was really well thought through and really interesting to hear. So thanks very much for the work that you've put into it. I suppose my question to you is, what more do you need from the council? What do you get from them at the moment? What would it be helpful to see more of in the future to help you to help you as the college sort of plan your kind of future kind of courses and things that you can support the students on, and for the students to sort of have access to sort of either data or intelligence or insights about the economy. So I'd just be really interested in knowing about what your working relationship is with council officers and the council at large now on these sorts of issues, and what might be better for you in the future as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll make a start, Jamie, and then please feel free to interject. I'm delighted to tell you, Councillor, we have, I believe, a very good relationship with the borough. We work very closely with Andrew, and he's absolutely right. Andrew, I take no offence at identifying where that data's come from, because the whole point is, isn't it, that we're using the same data and that we're looking at the same priorities. I think in terms of what we need going forward, it's not a case of necessarily more or different, but continued. And nuanced. So we work in splendid isolation. There is always communication that goes out to schools because the borough has a legal obligation and oversight of schools. And I think it's good when we are included in those conversations around not only the priorities for the borough, but the provision. I think Councillor Williams has very clearly identified that there is a scarcity of resource, but I believe the resource is sufficient so long as we're not all doubling up and doing the same work. So I think some of this is about a dialogue that prioritises and identifies who is best placed within the borough, competitive market notwithstanding, who is best placed to deliver on various parts of this, so that we use those resources intelligently and we build up a natural progression for a young person, or indeed a de-skilled, just come off furloughed adult looking to go into a new profession, that we identify a pathway that may actually be a combination of existing resources and takes somebody on a career path through a range of stages. So we've got, for example, London Met University on the edge of our our campus. Now, we don't necessarily have a particularly close working relationship with them. Not to say we don't get on with them at all, but we're not in a particularly close partnership on this particular agenda. But it may be sensible for us and London Met and Hackney to talk about a progression that takes a learner. So instead of me offering a level 5 or 6 out of my meagre resources, I prepare someone to go to London Met, and London Met are part of this conversation, or indeed Bath Spa, who are one of our HE partners, that we begin to work, as we have done a little bit around the race agenda. We begin to work on our areas of specialism and use those resources intelligently. So I think it's about the dialogue. I think it's about access to the data, and I think it's about recognizing each other's sort of time frames as well. If somebody says to me in August, could you run something in September? That's really hard for me. So it's appreciating each other's time frames and understanding those points in the year where it's easy for me to plan, to identify funds, to put things in place and be able to come back to Scrutiny or to other council organisations and say, you would like X and I can provide it by blank without cost because I can draw the funding down. So it's quite a waffly answer, but I hope, Councillor, that sort of makes sense. The refreshing thing is I'm not looking for money.
I think, good evening. I think just to add to that, I mean, Alison's articulated that really well, and Andrew touched upon this earlier. The work that we're doing here, we're not doing with any of the other boroughs we work with, so I absolutely do believe we are sort of leading and paving the way. If I was to say in terms of not even so much additional resource, because as Alison said, we have got the money, but I think the big piece of work we need to do now is about working with employers. 95% of employers don't have a business plan, letting them know what skills they're going to need for today, tomorrow, and moving forwards. So there's still a bit of piece of work of trying to articulate what are the immediate needs around skills needs and what we do in the future. When we have a young person that studies with us for 2 to 3 years, green skills we can absolutely build into their programme as a sort of golden thread, really, which we have been doing. But what I'm quite keen and what Andrew and I have been looking at is actually what are the jobs here and now. And I think once Kickstart is finished and we may see unemployment rise, how quickly we can then turn that curriculum on to get people back into employment very, very quickly, and particularly around green skills.
Thank you, Jamie and Alison. Councillor Smith, is your question for the new college?
Yes, it is. And thank you, everyone. It's been an amazing conversation. It's a conversation that's really, really important. I mean, just off the top of my head, I think it's really important to kind of identify what jobs we're talking about and what skills we actually need to sort of, put the language in there. That's really critical. And I could go on about different types of jobs, but I think we kind of just need to list them all and make it a little bit more easy to understand for people. But I mean, whilst many of the skills required for the net zero transition are specific to certain industries or trades, the transition will require and support an array of skills not unique to green roles. So there'll be an increased demand for cross, multi and interdisciplinary skills, such as those in whole house retrofitting. The government have identified a weakness in certain areas, and obviously science, technology, engineering and mathematics skills will underpin jobs that are key to taking forward the green recovery and delivering a net zero. For example, scientists will be needed to innovate the technologies for the net zero transition as described in the government's energy white paper. My question is, beyond STEM, there are several other areas that are also critical for the workforce to deliver net zero. And these includes, so what are you doing in regards to sort of digital and data skills? What are you offering there? Because that's a weakness that the government have come across. Another one they mentioned is project management. Project managers will be needed across all industries in a transition to net zero. To ensure timescales are managed and budgets and stuff are met. Educators and trainers and assessors are needed to mainstream green skills, which I suppose you're doing already. And then The other area is leadership, management, and communication skills. Leadership skills are needed to drive cultural change for a green economy. So are you doing anything along those lines? So in other words, the government have identified some gaps.
Yeah.
And how are you trying to fill them?
It's a really good question, Councillor. I think sometimes there is a bit of a chasm between the way that governments frame it and the way that governments facilitate. And we often find ourselves on the edge of that chasm. So to give you an example, some are very straightforward. So you've talked about digital. We run a digital curriculum that starts at level 1 and goes through to level 3 being the equivalent of A level, and then progresses on to work post level 3, so the sort of undergraduate level and then graduate level. For our adults, we run something called Essential Digital Skills. It was a new qualification the government rolled out in 2020. We were one of the highest providers in the country. And at entry level and level 1, our results last year are about 92%, less so for level 2. That has to do with people's capacity to stay online and finish during the pandemic. But we have been at the forefront of running that in terms of FE. When we talk about leadership skills, it's difficult, isn't it? Because you look at your average 16-year-old and you think, some of them have natural leadership skills, potentially not in the right direction, and they need challenging, but they certainly have a range of skills. We tend to look at that not so much by curriculum, but by enrichment and the work that we do around that. So things like our ambassador program, getting them to speak. We have them speaking. Some actually came and spoke to the mayor not so long ago. There's something about developing confidence and innovation. And certainly within some of our areas, we do run prizes around innovative curriculum, innovation, entrepreneurship. We run something called learning companies. So for some of our vocational areas, the way that learners are taught are live briefs. So if I give you an example from creative and digital, students from New City College designed the Elizabeth line graphics. They won the competition and they designed the graphics for that. We've got some of our students' artwork and digital capacity in 2 or 3 buildings at Bishopsgate and in Goldman Sachs at Canary Wharf. Now, they don't have to do that to get their qualification, but we're saying you can have the skills, but you've got to be able to go out and sell, and you've got to convince someone they want your project. So although they may not be quite leadership skills in the sense of having a piece of paper that says I am a certified leader, we are certainly looking at saying to our young people, as I said to you before, it's careers, not jobs. I get quite upset when people talk about getting our young people jobs. Nobody wants a job. They want a future. They want something they can be excited about and passionate about. And those skills have to be flexible, because people these days will have 11 or 12 jobs in their 11 or 12 different functions during their lifetime of work. So I think it's about the curriculum being robust and meeting specific skills, and outside that, offering the opportunity through entrepreneurship, enterprise, enrichment and experience to actually say to our young people, be more, be other. I love it when a student thinks about something in a different way from a teacher. As far as I'm concerned, we've won, because we've got them engaged, they're thinking about it and they're doing it in a different way. So sometimes difficult for me to be able to measure or present before you, but I'm very, very happy to invite you into college anytime, and you'll meet a whole bunch of leaders, whether you want to or not.
If I may add to that, so back in April, the government launched the National Skills Fund. So this is where individuals or adults didn't have a level 3, they could undertake a level 3 program. We did put online digital programs at level 3, data, coding, and also leadership and management, and the uptake's actually been very, very good. Going back to what you're saying about trainers and assessors and the teachers of the future, this is the biggest issue that Alison and I and colleagues have, is actually having enough teachers and trainers. And what we launched throughout the pandemic was a program which it was called Learn First, Teach Next. So this was mainly aimed at individuals who had been made redundant from industry or wanted to change a career, which was a 6-week teaching program. So over the pandemic, we supported 1,200 unemployed individuals, and we supported over 200 people to actually achieve the level 3 teaching award, which 97% achieved. From that, if they passed, they then had a guaranteed interview to then become a teacher, tutor, assessor at New City College. And also, if we hadn't taken them on directly, we had been supplying them to other providers. And again, it goes back to the partnership, which Andrew spoke about. Leadership and management. So again, we have got that as a program for adults. And we also introduced that as an apprenticeship, must be about 18 months ago, up to level 5, which we've got about 200 candidates on it. So we very much are looking at the skills for the adults as well as the young people, as Alison spoke about.
Thank you, Jamie. If I've got time, Alice and Jamie, could I ask a quick question? Okay, great.
Of course.
So I'm quite concerned about the imbalance, it appears to me, between the professional managerial green jobs and the kind of craft green jobs. I know it's kind of building on the question that Councillor Smith made and what you've talked about in terms of the skills gap across different industries. So my question is, you did talk about the work as well that we need to do in terms of inspiring young people, their families, in terms to do some of these jobs. So what can you expand on that a little bit? But also perhaps, coming from a construction background myself, what do you think needs to change in some of these sectors to enable young people to feel much more inspired to work in these? And I'm not just referring to construction, but that is the area that I am now. So any thoughts? Would be very great.
I will share my thoughts such as they are, but others may have other things to add. I think, first of all, there is something about exposure. I had a very traditional education, went to school, went to university, went to another university. You could argue I've never left school. So from that point of view, perhaps I'm a bit of a failure in this process. But when we look at young people today, I think one of the things we need to do culturally is move away from a very linear view of what education is. And I think it's what the T-levels were trying to do, this parity of esteem between vocational and academic. I'm not sure it's going to have quite the impact that it's mooted to do, and I'm not sure that it will do that as soon as possible. But I think it's about that expansion of horizons. If you think of something like construction and you look at the advocacy and the marketing for it, I'm afraid we still live in a situation where 90% of those adverts will involve a hard hat or a trowel, and that's not the industry. The industry is at least 50% sitting in offices doing jobs that do not require PPE and are not based on somebody's physical build at all. And I think we need to go back and challenge the lazy definitions we use. So even the term construction that I have used this evening and others have used this evening, it covers such a multitude of disciplines that in using it, we are perpetuating a stereotype and a myth. So within our construction at the college, there are 14 different skills. And I mean very different skills, from mastic asphalt to plumbing to project management that Councillor Smith mentioned, through to retrofit. And I think we need to break these down and we need to expose people to them. Sometimes it's about earning capacity. For some people, there's an aspiration around that. There's also within society, I think, some jobs that are seen as less aspirational, candidly. And I think if we want to do this work, it's about the way that we promote that. So being mindful of our marketing, talking to parents, exposing parents and young people. We have a lot of young women who want to come and get involved in construction, and the greatest barrier to that is normally parental pressure. That's the thing that stops. So I think there's some education to do around that, and I think that goes for all areas. I think also we need to stop looking at progression and aspiration as a kind of something that stops at 25. So there will be people who go into the highly kinesthetic, highly practical, hands-on areas of a range of professions, which may be things like early years, healthcare, catering, etc., and will start at the the sharp edge of that, but will progress later in life. And that might involve lifelong learning and further qualifications to move into the moving and shaping of that career path, of that profession. And I think we put a bit of a lid on it and we say what you haven't achieved by the time you're 21, you haven't achieved. And that's a myth. And I personally don't think I've ever stopped learning. And I think I would want to curl up and crawl under a rock if I ever did. But I think we put a lid on where people have achieved by. If you haven't been to university by the time you're 21, we talk about someone who's 23 at university as a mature learner. We can talk for a long time about the definition of mature in that sense. But I think we just need to get away from this idea that your learning is ever stopped, that your aspirations ever stopped, or that it's wrong to want to do a very hands-on job for a period of time. I think we need to stop devaluing the people who can do and putting greater manager on those who make greater value on the managers who are directing them. I think, and that's easier said than done, but some of it is around exposure and around the language we use and the images that we sell.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, my hope is that the increase in desire and push for green jobs in these sectors will actually increase the parity and the esteem for those that are using their hands, but also that there's better links for those people if they choose to switch to more professionals, because the trade that they've learned is actually seen and perceived as being valuable, to being a surveyor, to being a manager, an architect, which is the way of doing things in other countries, and I think we can learn quite a lot from them. So yeah, any work that you can do as a college and obviously the council can do to encourage that shape, that change, would be very welcome.
I think just to add to that, if I may, we run construction and engineering Saturday club, which is for 14 to 16-year-olds. And because they are coming out and having that exposure and actually seeing all the different types of roles that you can undertake, this is then enabling them to progress with us or with other institutions into jobs around sort of construction and engineering. So we've spoken quite a lot about the partnership and the power of the partnership. I think probably some of the next steps around this whole agenda is about how we work with the schools, how we get into secondary schools, and actually show them the types of careers that they can then enter and then raise awareness, really. But I completely agree with all the comments that have been made around this.
And I know it's probably for another day, but we'd love to hear about your college in Rainham. You're talking about these sustainable industries, because I presume that will be available to our Hackney residents to attend. And also,
absolutely. The way the college matrix works is that learners learn locally, particularly at low level when perhaps they're finding their feet. And then as they progress through, we try and have opportunity within reach. But certainly they are more than welcome to apply, and they go over. So students from Hackney have been over and used the equipment at Rainham just for the joy of going somewhere else and seeing cutting edge industry in gleaming buildings that I called it the other day a temple to industry, and I was laughed out of the building, but I'm going to use it tonight because I'm on Zoom and you can't laugh when you're out. But I think it's really important that we show gleaming buildings. It's not shabby sheds, and there's nothing wrong with that, but those images need to be burst. We need to stop thinking of as we have to do with so many things, we need to stop thinking about things in terms of as they have been and start shaping them around what we want them to be going forward, I think.
Thank you very much. Well, I don't think we can keep you because you did say till 8:30. So just, thank you very much for attending the session. I'm sure if members have any follow-on questions, we can send them to you by email.
Thank you, Chair. It's been a real pleasure. Apologies, but we've got meetings tomorrow Jamie and I have to prep for, so we're going to go off now and do work for something else. I'm so sorry, but thank you for your time.
Your work isn't done. Thank you very much for tonight.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Good night.
Good night, Jamie. Good night, Alison. So, members, have we got any more questions at all? What you've heard tonight?
Also, I'd just like to make a point back to Councillor Coburn and about the need for a strategy, because I think Councillor Williams put it very well. This is an immensely complicated range across a range of portfolios, and the need to integrate is the point I was making, not that very good work is being done. And he outlined some of the excellent work that's initiatives that have been taken in Hackney, and I totally accept that we are considerably ahead of the other boroughs. Unfortunately, that is not going to win the prize. Being ahead of, I think, a real failure among many boroughs to even tackle this agenda. So I just want to make the point, we're not, the issue is not how the particular initiatives we're taking, not where we stand in the hierarchy. It is, have we got a realizable plan that integrates the different activities that have been set out tonight, says how much money is being devoted to each of them, and mobilizes resources where we can't ourselves meet it. It's a plan we want, I guess, rather than a set of aspirations. So I don't want to look past. I want to say, look, it really is urgent that we put that in place. And I think if we want to aspire as Hackney to have a true plan, it isn't about what happens in 2030. It's what happens in the next year, 2 years, and so on. And that's the sort of plan I think we should hope for and expect from the executive as a whole, not simply the skills and employment thing. Because I think a lot of good work we've heard going on there. How does this fit in, and what are the priorities within it that go to different activities? So I hope that makes it clear that this is not about criticising Mete's.
No, I mean, I think we all share the urgency that you're speaking of, Councillor Sham, and you want to hear concrete plans. Well, I will go over to Councillor Coburn.
Yeah, just sorry, Chair, I should have actually mentioned, but Councillor Sharman is right, and I think, you know, like when you look at Hackney, in many ways, we've obviously been leading in terms of, as I've said, in terms of the deliverable actions that we've been taking. But one of the work that we're undertaking is obviously developing Hackney's climate action plan, which I've spoken before at Scrutiny panel, and obviously that fits hand in hand with the Environmental Sustainability Board. And the Hackney Climate Action Plan basically recognises exactly what Councillor Sharman has quite sort of rightly identified, which is that, you know, we as Hackney, since declaring a climate emergency, is obviously, you know, ploughed forward in terms of, you know, making sure that we're action first. But what's missing is sort of the strategic thinking across the corporate body in terms of bringing all of everything that we're doing together. So the climate action plan currently is being developed, and it's focused on 7 different themes, which follows the London Council's climate action plan, and, you know, one of which is sort of a green economy, and this is part of how that fits within it. And obviously in terms of the governance and the accountability, it sits within the Environmental Sustainability Board, which, you know, both myself, Councillor Caroline Woodley, and, you know, nearly all of the different directors of different service areas kind of sit into. And then below that you have the different working groups around each of the different themes that feed into that and take away and lead on the sort of the work that we're doing. In terms of where we are with developing the climate action plan, we are quite clear, and one of the things that I've been quite clear is that this climate action plan needs to have the input of our communities, and that's why the Citizen Assembly that obviously we committed to in 2019 when we declared a climate emergency will happen. Hackney's own version of a Citizen Assembly will happen hopefully either in January or in February at the very latest, where we'll be looking to sort of take forward some of our ideas to share with residents and to seek their input. We'll be developing that into a draft version that will go to cabinet and then consultation, hopefully in sort of the summer, so between like June to sort of August, I believe, and then hopefully we'll be in a position where in the autumn of 22 the Hackney Climate Action Plan will be published. I think it's really important. Absolutely, you know, 100% we need to be urgent about it. But I also think it's really important that we have to make sure that we take our communities on a journey with us. And that's why it's so important that we have that engagement piece right. We had that with the Green Recovery event that we had just a month ago. Obviously, the activities that we were doing at COP, the work that both myself, the Mayor, and of course Deputy Mayor Bramble were doing around speaking to young people at schools around what they want to see. So I think, you know, absolutely, to answer your question, you know, the climate action plan will basically be that strategic framework for the council to adopt. And then from that, then as I say to you, it becomes everyone priority. So I should have mentioned that in sort of my opening remarks actually, but just very much to really echo what Councillor Sharman is saying, and thank you for raising that. I think it's really important that we do talk about the climate action plan.
Great, thank you, Councillor Coburn. And taking our communities with us is vital if we want to make this a sustainable pathway going forward. Because if we don't take our communities, it's going to be much harder to do that. So time taken to do it right is also crucial. So yeah, thanks for both of your comments. Sorry, go on, Councillor Coburn.
Yeah, just one thing that I would just say in this person, I think it's really important to say this, and it's really important to recognise this. Obviously, we're all aware of how much emissions are sort of directly in response from the council. So about 5% of emissions, of carbon emissions, about maybe about 23% sort of indirect, sort of in our control, and then of course the rest is borough wide. So it's down to individuals about how we travel, how we dress, how we eat, all those sorts of things. And I think what the really important thing that I really want to mention, because I think it's so important that really is missed out in this whole debate around how we tackle the climate crisis, is the one point, which is what you just mentioned, which is about how we take our communities with us. And the second thing is about not shaming people for living the way that they live their lives and the actions that they're taking. It's a journey. I think we recognize that it's a crisis that we live in. Absolutely, we need to improve climate literacy among our communities, but we cannot shame people for actions that they take. We need to educate, work with them, and help support them, provide the infrastructure support that they need to be able to make towards to live in much more sustainable ways. So I think it's just really important that we manage that, because one of the things that I do not want to see from this debate is I think we all share the same ambitions in this borough. We all want to live in a borough which has got healthier streets, cleaner air, better jobs. Of course we want to. I think everyone wants to do that, but I think what's really important is that we don't end up in a position. I think it's quite very easy for us to fall into the trap where we'll be seeming to be telling people to live the way that they should be living their lives, and I don't think we should sort of fall into that trap. And I think it's so important that we do that working with our communities, and that's why the Citizens Assembly is really important. And of course, it's why the community engagement we do is really important too.
Thanks, Councillor Coburn. So before I draw this item to a close, if I could, I'm also going to bring in Councillor Smith too, who's waiting to speak. Just checking around the room, Councillor. Oh, okay. If I could also ask the question, that similar question that I asked to the New City College of Andrew and Simon, in terms of how you think here in Hackney we can address that imbalance between the kind of professional managerial dominance, and to also address the gender and race disparity too. So if you'd like to comment on that, but I'll also get Councillor Smith's question so you can answer both at the same time. Councillor Smith, this is the last question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And as you know, I've got an extraordinary interest in all this stuff. This is my kind of key area of interest and expertise. I would just like to say on the just transition thing that basically it's about a fair distribution of climate goods, in other words, GOODS, which are the new jobs and the cleaner air and a better environment for everybody, nicer parks, etc. And a fair distribution of the bads, which are basically the higher costs involved associated with decarbonisation and obviously the job losses. So we're talking about a fair distribution. Now, if we get that right, Chair, we will be helping people, the elderly. We will be helping marginalised groups. We will be helping people with disabilities. We'll be helping low-income households. We'll be helping people, persons in substandard accommodation, and we'll be helping people with chronic illnesses. So this is a win-win thing. I would like to make sure that we kind of. I just want to see some lists really about what these jobs are in our borough. So, how I would go about that would be to, it's obvious and, you're probably thinking about it, but to go through all the sectors that are kind of basically, relating to our borough. So, for example, heat pumps would be there. You would have, cars, you would have waste and circular economy, you would have climate change adaptation sector, heat networks, retrofit, nuclear, you wouldn't, because we're not going to have a nuclear power plant on Hackney Marshes anytime soon. Possibly forestry, we have some woods here. So basically, I'm just saying, split it up into sectors, and then look at within each sector as to what jobs we might be thinking about. And giving jobs a bit of a title like I don't know, like wilderness restorer or something like that. Helping to restore animals, reclaim their habitat, in our parks or whatever. Environmental engineers specializing in fuels, for example, could be one. Maybe not in Hackney. Electric vehicle technician, and we give these jobs titles. What else have we got here? Circular economy retailer. So we're kind of getting into talking about waste from one industry becomes fuel for another. So we give these jobs names and titles. We got plumbers and electricians and things. You might have a home energy auditor and kind of like a construction insulator. So we're giving people names, and then we apply the skills they need for each of those jobs within each sector that's relevant to our borough. I mean, maybe I'm teaching you all how to suck eggs, but I just like to see the language in a little bit more kind of a plainer form of language, really, with a more logical kind of look at all the different sectors and jobs within. So that's one point. And just very, very quickly, Chair, I was just wondering, the government have various initiatives to help with this kind of green job agenda. There are green apprenticeships. There's the green skills boot camps that they've got going. There's an electrification skills boost that they've got going. They've got free courses for jobs, free level 3 qualifications, skills fund. There's a whole gambit of different things that they're offering. This is part of the Green Jobs Task Force report that was recently produced. What are we accessing any of this stuff? Because are we accessing any of this stuff? Because there's lots of money being pumped into this, and I would like to see us kind of reach out, find out what these government programs are, and get some money out of them. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Smith. And Andrew and Simon, or any, or Rotimi or Lucy, you're very welcome to come in on any of that. I'll start off with sorry, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. So just responding to your question before, Councillor Potter, about that imbalance with, I guess, the more craft-related jobs, trade-related versus managerial. I agree with a lot of what Alison said. I noted down 5 points. I think careers advice is incredibly important. I suspect Councillor Williams would agree with me. I think this is an area where the council's not getting things quite right yet, and there is work behind the scenes on it. I think this work on green economy provides a really, really useful kind of, I guess, rocket boost to moving ahead with some of that much needed focus on careers advice. It was great to hear what Jamie was talking about. I think that is a partnership endeavour. Related, I think, role models. The best approach is building that change gradually. The best way of getting people into apprenticeships is other apprentices talking about it. So, and I guess it's that social capital element. The third point I wanted to make was incremental change. Alison's stats on this, I thought they might actually look worse. They still don't look great, but there is some incremental change going on. And I think we need to do more, but I think we need to just, recognise there is gradual change. And part of that is partnership with employers. I think we as a council, as Councillor Coburn and Jamie were both talking about, I think this is an area we do really well at. And I think Rotimi and I are working really well together on how we work with supply chains. Things like Kickstart were a really useful mechanism to developing those relationships with employers, because then that gets us around the table to make these really clear asks and to be very quite demanding. Actually, as Alison was saying as well, around these are values we have in an organisation, here are our expectations. And I guess the fifth point is around this focus on climate change really allows us to begin to have that conversation around structural inequality, which is much needed, but in a way this climate change focus is in many ways a good mechanism do that and draw attention to some of the things you are talking about, Councillor Potter. Councillor Smith's point, rest assured we are always looking for funding opportunities. I know Simone wants to say anything more. I guess as officers, we always have to be really careful. But I think as Alison touched on, the funding opportunities aren't always quite as exciting as they seem to be when you drill down into some of the detail. Is probably all I'd say on that.
Okay, just to follow on from what Councillor Smith has said, is it possible to have a report at a future meeting, and we can decide which, about, you know, the stats that he talked about, you know, the stats on, you know, the green jobs, what are, you know, residents, what trades are in what, you know, so what green jobs are in, and also what jobs are in where they may transition to being green. So, you know, all of the construction trades, etc., mechanics, in transport. It'd be really good to have that kind of data to show what is actually going on in Hackney.
So two points to make around, and Simone might want to come in, is I think it's incredibly important and worth making sure, I guess, Tim, that it's firmly noted in the minutes that the Commission is really looking for that kind of Hackney specific research on this, which is very much part of that work programme. I'd be really keen, Councillor Potter, to explore how we can kind of jointly work, co-design what that research looks like with Scrutiny. And I think the second point, and something the Mayor's been very clear on as Councillor Williams, is an audit of what council jobs, and probably including within our supply chain as well, team, are green now. So what that kind of baseline is right now. So I think they are two key areas, and I'm sure we'd be delighted to come back and provide an update on that, both those areas.
Chair, can I just add to, I've shared Councillor Smith's frustration that waiting for the perfect is the enemy of the practical, which we can do now. We could do a rough analysis of the SEG categories that relate to it and just get at broad numbers. By all means, then refine it with a strategy, and I'm all for that, and it takes us forward. But at the moment, I certainly feel that we're flying blind at both ends of this. How many people are affected by council, by climate change? How many people are likely to be affected? Just give us some broad numbers. And I come back to Councillor Coburn's point about a strategy. Absolutely right that we go out and get people. Without their support, this will go nowhere. So absolutely right. But we should have an outline of the main proposals of that strategy for people to get their teeth into. So again, if we go down the path of delay, we might have a perfect strategy in 2 years' time. We should have an outline strategy which guides our initial work now, with a view to building that support and building the perfect strategy. But it's just, I think all of us are feeling a bit, we need to get a grip of this and give us some basic numbers now.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Sharman. So Lucia and then Councillor Williams, and then I will close this item. So Lucia.
Thank you, Chair. And just to reiterate the points, I believe, and give you some assurance and maybe some numbers. In terms of the action plan which we develop as part of energy action plan within the council own portfolio, and also the wider piece of work which Councillor Coburn mentioned, each individual action has a section which says skills and green jobs, where you can identifying those sectors and identifying the jobs and job description which will be needed and necessary for us to deliver it. But just to give you a context of where we start as organization, in 2019 we declared climate emergency, yes. We delivered a lot of great projects in other years, but we took ourselves, an entire organization, the journey to start really from ground zero to actually having an action plan which can actually take us to another 20 years forward. So the amount of work which has been done, it's tremendous. And in order to be confident and give this committee and also the residents kind of a guarantee that these jobs will be created, we need to be certainly assured and done a lot of groundwork, both within the skills and growth team in the council, as also within the work which we do with the college, that we can gather as much data as possible. Whenever we're going to consult with the community, we can actually be certain that those jobs will be created. Because if I come today and or any of the officers will give you a number and say, within the retrofit, we need 2,500 jobs, which parity projects identify as a part of London Council works at the sub-region level for Hackney. What does it actually mean? Are we gonna, what skills we actually gonna need? So this work has been undertaken, and we'll be more than happy, as Andrew said, to come back at the later stage, especially as we develop the carbon action plans for the organisation to, you know, support this conversation with the actual work streams and action plans of how we're getting from, you know, creating those jobs, creating those opportunities, and then the actual deliver the actual actions to, you know, help those sectors and create those jobs.
Thank you, Lucia. Councillor Williams.
I wasn't really going to say very much, but I did wonder whether Simone wanted to come in. But I did want to make some of the same points around the amount of work that has gone in to get us to where we are today. I don't think we should underestimate the effort, officer time and resources that's gone behind this. I think we also need to remember what has taken place over the last 20 months, that the council put all its resources behind responding to a pandemic as well as a cyber attack. During that time, there has been a huge amount of work, particularly around Councillor Coburn's portfolio area in adult learning. So there was the integration of adult learning with the employment and skills team. So as soon as officers have had the spare capacity to deliver the day job, they have been doing just that. There's a great deal more detail, of course, that we can add to the outline that has been presented this evening. But as Lucia was saying, we've done a huge amount, or officers have done a huge amount of work. And I think that certainly as Cabinet Lead Member for Human Resources, I do need to recognise the contribution that they have made. Be careful not to overtax them and stretch them at what has been an incredibly burdensome time, where we know they are burnt out, they are working from home, and as we all know, when you work from home you produce so much more. So I don't underestimate the amount of effort that has gone in to producing this. Simone, I don't know if you wanted to say anything in particular about what statistics, what we can produce. I think that Andrew said earlier, doing an audit of council jobs, and I would imagine that might be something that we can do relatively easy, because that's internal to the organisation. Doing something external is probably going to take a little bit more time, but I'll hand over to Simone.
Yeah, just very briefly, I think I'd agree that we do need this Hackney-specific data, which is kind of why it's on our to-do list. I think, yeah, one element is about green jobs we have in the council currently that we've kind of discussed this morning, and will be taken forward with kind of HR and OD really soon. The second thing is about, I think what Lucia said, climate action plans are being developed, and one of the requests that have gone in from our end is to ask every other climate action plan to identify what the skills needs for the future might look like and what the businesses are that they think they might need to work with. So we can then, from the green economy perspective, see what we can do to support those. And then the third thing is just to say that the Green Jobs Task Force nationally came out in the summer. This WPI research has been referenced, came out less than 2 weeks ago. They're currently doing research on a more sub-regional basis and a borough basis, which we will then obviously use to produce more Hackney-specific data. And if we then have to go out and find our own kind of specific stuff, we will see what we can do, obviously. But that's kind of the timeline we've been working to, which is probably why it's not as complete as we would like. But there are 115 pages for me to read at some point at 5 minutes, so we will get back to you.
Yeah, there's no criticism here, by the way. We love the work you're doing. Just carry on.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Simone, and also all of you for attending tonight. I mean, you can obviously hear the urgency from members in, you know, trying to find out more, trying to urge, you know, you to act quicker. But we also, at the same time, very much appreciate the work that you do. We know it's not easy, and we know there's a massive change that we need to help shape and make happen as well, which is a huge, huge, huge task, particularly in terms of green jobs. I mean, you talked about, I think, Simone, you talked about, you know, the massive increase and pace of change that needs to happen, which is double what has been seen in the IT and communication sector in recent years. So it's absolutely huge. So very much appreciate the work that you're doing. I will close this item now, and thank you very much for all attending. You are welcome. Those of you who are here just for this item, you're welcome to leave. We will only be a few more minutes, I think, but I shall let you leave in your own time. Councillor Smith, of course, you're very welcome to stay. You cannot get off that lightly. Okay, so the next item, minutes of the previous meeting. Can we agree these minutes? There hasn't been any matters arising presented, but I did notice that Councillor Spencer was described as Councillor Spencer, so we can correct that.
I'll be amending that.
Yeah, okay. Can we agree the minutes?
Agreed.
Yeah, move the minutes. Sorry, I thought you meant matters
Yeah, no,
arising.
I haven't. So, item 7, any other business? It looks like you would like to speak, Councillor Sharman. Go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. No, I just really wanted to raise the issue that we asked a couple of meetings ago about the framework for the regeneration function, which Stephen Haynes presented to us, I think in June, that sort of time, with a promise to come back to us with a framework for the strategy, and again, the sort of amounts of money devoted to each of the activities, a sort of plan, if you like, for putting his aspirations into practice. I'm quite concerned that here we are in November, still no report from Stephen Haynes. I do think it's a very important issue, and I'd like to press for it as early as possible.
Thank you for raising that, Councillor Sharman, and that's something you'll follow up, Tim. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, any more business members? Well, without further ado, I'd like to formally close the meeting. Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you, Chair.